how the hell are they charging that?
Welcome to the Aesthetics Mastery Show. I'm Dr. Tim Pearce.
Hi, I'm Miranda Pierce.
And today we are going to have our first viral show. Unfortunately, it's the coronavirus we're going to talk about. And we're also going to talk about hepatitis B, C, and HIV and how it could be spread with certain bad practices. What else are we going to talk about?
So we're also going to tackle the thorny question of how the hell are they charging that? I see this on Facebook groups all the time. You guys asking, seriously, £40 for 1 mil of filler? And so, yeah, we're going to go there and ask and actually answer the question, how are they managing, they being competitors, maybe non-meds, etc. How are they managing to charge so little?
Yes. Good, interesting topics that come up all the time on social media.
And what can our response be as well as practitioners?
So let's dig in. What's first?
Okay, so let's go there first, I think. So it really is such a pain point. I see you guys all the time saying, someone's opened up next to me and they're charging 2 pence for 5 mils and I don't know how I'm supposed to compete. And then what gets loaded in as well is that you guys say, I've spent so much on courses. I've put all my energies into it. You don't say this, but I can sense that you're really falling in love with this industry and what it could potentially bring to your life. And then someone just comes along next to you, charges a ridiculous price, but also they often seem to have a great social media following. So it's incredibly triggering. And people are literally racking their brains like, how can they charge that when we, all of us medical people, are buying from proper pharmacies and paying, obviously normal prices. So what's going on?
So there are multiple ways that you can reduce your prices, and some of them are absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with them. And I don't want to be someone who says there's only one business model. There's room for Aldi and there's room for Sainsbury's. And you can take that model of I'm going to have low margins and high volumes. The problem is when you start to cut corners in order to achieve that. And that's where I really have an issue with it. And that unfortunately is absolutely happening. And there's loads of evidence of it. It gets shared on these Facebook groups. You can find it if you just search for it. So it's worth remembering that there are those two components to it. Some people are just legitimately doing a different business model. I'm trying to reduce the cost so that I get more clients that way. Unfortunately, there's a very fine line, because one of the things that's worth knowing around business strategy in general is there's only one person who can be the cheapest in town. Anyone else is therefore at a disadvantage, because you're competing for the niche of cheapest, and that can work if you can maintain that. But it's a difficult game where the need to cut corners will pop into your mind occasionally, because we're all human, and if someone else comes out who's a pound cheaper and you've got to cut costs even more, some people, some of the time, not all people, will think of a way of doing it a bit cheaper that's not actually in the patient's best interest. And those are the ideas we've got to be very careful of and look out for. So there are lots of those. One of them would be, we had a researcher look for buying product online, and we found some absolutely shocking numbers. So you can actually buy a dermal filler product for $8 for 2 mils. And you can actually pay extra and have it branded if you want to. So you can create your own brand. I'm not going to share the link where that's findable, but this really blew me away, because we pay, about £100 per mil to buy it. More than that, 120. So if you're trying to compete with someone who's buying it from the internet, from an unvalidated source, because that's the big difference. This is where it gets tricky, is that these products are made in an unregulated fashion. They're just made in a factory somewhere, probably somewhere abroad, where there's no testing, there's no validation, there's any claims about how long it lasts or whether it's got impurities in it. None of that's available.
It could be anything.
Absolutely.
I'm literally feeling scared thinking about it.
And the people who are making them are also trying to be the cheapest in town. So they've also got the same drive to cut costs. They don't have a brand to think about. It's not like they're trying to protect their reputation. They're just selling it as cheap as possible. online, making it as cheap as possible, trying to cut corners at every point. So you just have absolutely no idea what's in it. And the chances are the cheapest thing possible is in it, because that's the niche they're going for. So this is why I hate the concept of trying to be the cheapest in town, because it drives you down a route where the only way to win is to continuously become cheaper and cheaper, which is tricky for most people to stay disciplined and not do something that's not in the interests of your patient. Now, we're supposed to be healthcare professionals, I think, doing this, and you should always put your needs of your patient ahead of cutting costs, even if that means you don't treat as many people, because you're slightly more expensive. So that's the key thing to remember is, if you go for the cheapest product for the cheapest place in town, there's a small chance that you're also going to be getting something you're not planning for. Other ways, unfortunately, I've heard of clinicians reducing costs is some are diluting it with saline. So just mixing the product with even a third of saline will basically reduce your costs by a third. So you can't tell on the day, it looks pretty much the same. They just might lose volume a little bit quicker and you could be getting away with it. So it's very hard to tell, but I'm aware of many practitioners who kind of drop that in about a little thing that they do, which is unfortunate.
Can I ask about that? So what is going on with that? Like, can you just put saline in and it's not going to have any cross-infection issues?
You could do that without cross-infection issues. It's possible. Depends how you're doing it. It's obviously you are messing with the product. It's more, I don't think it's necessarily a risk for bloodborne diseases. It's just a way of spreading the product a bit more thinly. It may have some unintended consequences, like the product will probably diffuse slightly. It's worth knowing that hyaluronic acid, the actual syringe, is mainly saline anyway. So you basically have a sugar that holds moisture. That's kind of what hyaluronic acid is. So giving it a bit more moisture to hold isn't that tricky. It won't look different. It probably won't even feel that different to inject, and on the day and maybe the first few weeks afterwards will be quite similar, but it isn't as the manufacturers intended it. So you may not get quite what you're paying for.
That's from my perspective as, a non-clinical person. That's why I think that's out of order, because you are giving this person who's paying their money, no matter how much you're charging, even if you're just charging £1 or it's free, it's still there's a relationship, there's contracts going on there, an emotional one and a clinical one, where you are basically saying this is what you're getting, and then they're not getting it. I don't know. I mean, are those people, I wonder, are they saying, by the way, I've looked into it and it's okay, I'm diluting your product?
Well, actually, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you're taking that approach...
Yeah, but are they?
Well, some will. Most probably aren't, because the real benefit is the cost saving. The real benefit is not to the patient in most cases. Now, there is an argument, I have heard it said around, certain areas of the face that maybe you'll get less edema if you've mixed it up with saline. There's no science behind it. So there are reasons, and I have no objection to this at all. If you think you've learned something that fundamentally is true about the product that you believe is true, and you may not have a big study, but you think that's how it works better, and you're open with your patients and you do something to the product, like lots of people will mix lidocaine with it in the old days especially. There's nothing wrong with doing that if you're open to it. There's nothing unethical. You may not have science backing you, but it's not a moral failing. Whereas unfortunately, the very fine line between that and thinking, hang on, I'm saving a third of my product here. My product cost, the main cost of your business, is 30% less than my competition. That's going to be tempting for a lot of people to do that.
And interestingly, we haven't spoken about this, but there was a colleague put a link onto the Closed Skin Viva training group yesterday about a GMC case that hadn't gone in the way of the doctor because he was using Azalor or another Botox alternative and wasn't open about that, and was saying to the patient, which I'm sure a lot of people will do that, not meaning to be horrible or unethical or anything. They're just kind of talking about it as Botox because that's what we all talk about it as. And yeah, so
that's very interesting. So the case there is you've told me I'm getting one drug, but you've given me a different one,
even though it's fine, as well as a fine drug. But yeah,
but it's not about whether it's a fine drug or not. It's the technicality of the fact that it's like prescribing someone an antidepressant and giving them an antibiotic from a legal perspective.
Yes,
that may not be how we all think about it, but that's worth knowing. That's a really good tip for you guys. If you are using different products, refer to them by their names. Otherwise, if you end up in a court case and they say you said you treated me with Botox and it turns out to be Azalor or Bocacure, that could be a major flaw in your argument. So
exactly, and there's no shame in doing that. Just do it.
Yeah, just tell them. Patients don't mind if you're open about it. You give them the reasons why you've chosen that product, and they won't mind at all. It's about not lying about which product you're using.
So, is there anything else you want to say about the dilution thing?
Not much on dilution. The most dangerous of all the ways I've seen people saving costs is by sharing syringes. And this comes up on, I mean, people are really brazen. This does come from the non-regulated side of the market, where they will share literally on a Facebook post, I've got someone coming in for a treatment. Does anyone want to share the other half of a mil? And then you will sometimes even see videos on Instagram of it being done. So you can actually see, you know, a couple of people in the room. One of these minor celebrities who does injecting was doing it without gloves on. So you've now got no gloves on, same person, two different people having a procedure with the same product. Now, I do think that most people who've got any kind of education will know they're not going to use the same needle, but they're not realizing that there's a really similar risk with bloodborne diseases such as HIV, hepatitis B, and possibly HIV, that if your work surfaces are contaminated because your syringe is a work surface, so you're touching that, patients bleed. Now, if you're not wearing gloves, it's even worse because you're probably not washing your hands in between as well. So you're injecting one person, getting a bit of blood. You can probably barely see it. It might be a tiny streak on the needle. And 2 minutes later, you're injecting the next person. Fair enough, you changed the needle, but you're touching the same surface. And these viruses last a long time. Hepatitis C will live on a surface for 3 weeks before it's no longer able to contaminate someone. Hepatitis B is about a week. HIV within a dried area of blood can last 5 to 7 days. Now, you've got to have a fair amount of blood to do that, but it can certainly last a minute in a drop of blood. So all of these are potentially transferable for people who are not basically having a proper clinical workspace where you're being very clean with each patient having their own syringe, their own environment, basically. So this is a big risk. There has been one case of HIV being spread that's known about, because there'll be more that aren't known about. That was around a dermaroller treatment, I think. So quite a bloody procedure, but using the same dermaroller on different people. Obviously, it's risky, but I think it's a matter of time with bad clinical practice before that happens to a member of the public.
And I feel like when I'm imagining someone who's unregulated, so for example, a beauty therapist or whoever is doing this treatment, they might think, oh, well, I've changed the needle. What's the problem? You know, stop going on about it, you know, Dr. Tim. But actually, I think the reason that they can get away with that kind of attitude is because they've got nothing to lose. You know, if that patient gets HIV, like there's no redress against this person. Whereas if you do something bad, you've got something to lose, which is your GMC pin. And this is why it's so wrong. This is at the heart of the whole unregulated people versus regulated people in our industry, is that there's nowhere to go. They've got nothing to lose, really. I mean, maybe reputation, but you can overcome that, as we've seen.
Yeah. I don't want to state it that I'm sure people care about people as a general rule. The problem is, we know from talking to the people that we train, healthcare professionals have anxiety about losing their PIN. They're constantly thinking about it. And it's actually woven into the culture. I was thinking about how working in a hospital, you kind of get indoctrinated into a way of thinking about patient safety and about how you fit into that world. And when you first start, you don't quite get it. And then you get so many conversations with other clinicians who are like, oh, you know, you've got to be able to defend that action in court. And what are you going to say if someone asks you this whole, can you defend your practice, is something that's woven into anyone who's an independent practitioner, which just isn't something that's needed if you're part of the non-regulated world. So even good people, basically, I think, are quite likely to have bad practice because they're not habitualized in this way to minimize risk constantly and to fear the impact on their own personal lives if it goes wrong. So I absolutely agree with you, and there is a sense of nothing to lose, but I don't think that means these people are necessarily cavalier. It's just that they just don't have the same need to systematically go through those processes of minimizing risk because it's not part of the culture of how they think. Yeah. And you can see that because it's on Instagram. You can literally watch people doing horrendous things that scare the crap out of me, basically, when I see it being done. The injection techniques, the lack of safety, the lack of gloves, the lack of, basic cleanliness. But it's not to say that they actually don't care about their patients. They're just oblivious. Like it's basically that Dunning-Kruger effect, which I spoke about recently, which is they don't know what they don't know. They feel like good people just trying to make a difference, but they just do not know what they're missing out. And that's where the risk to patient comes.
So people might be watching this here thinking, well, it's all very well, you know, you saying that we shouldn't be the cheapest in town, but I live in a deprived area. My clients are always challenging me on my prices, and it's tricky with certain people to get a lift if they're not having a few syringes. So it's all right for you, Dr. Tim, with your big shiny clinic. What about me? How can people watching this here market themselves to not be the cheapest in town?
Well, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is don't commoditize yourself by selling syringes, even packages of this as well. Because as soon as you say, I'm selling a mil of filler, what's the difference between you and the person down the road selling a mil of filler? There is no difference. To the uneducated, which is everyone who's not in this industry, the difference between, a filler that might be called, who knows, like Viva filler, versus an FDA approved product, it means there's no difference. You can stick any brand you like. It might be a brand that you made up and you bought on the Chinese website and had branded up yourself. There's no way to tell. So you've got to sell more than the thing you're injecting. You've got to sell yourself. You've got to make yourself the unique selling point. So that, and the only way you can do that is by delivering lots of value to the people that you treat, like really caring about them, making the best difference you can, educating them along the way. As soon as you start to make yourself the holder of a syringe of filler versus the human being behind it, you're on a way to race to the bottom. You're going to have to compete on price. You're going to have to talk about mills. You're going to have to look for cheaper products to compete, because there's no difference between you. It's like the word commodity comes from grain, buying metals like precious metals or whatever. It's the thing has the value, not the person who dug it up. And we don't want to be competing in that area, because the honest truth is the real value is in the practitioner. They're the person who looks after them. You are the person who will look after them if they have a complication. You're the person who gives them the advice. You're the person who should be honing the risks that they take to make sure that they get the result that actually makes them happy. That takes a unique individual. It doesn't take a syringe full of hyaluronic acid. So don't market yourself as the holder of a syringe of filler. You're much better than that.
It's so true. And a colleague last night on a group, Richard, he was saying, he gave the example of a restaurant. So if you go to a Michelin star restaurant, of course, that if you went into the kitchen, the carrots would be pretty much the same carrots that you can buy anywhere. I mean, they might be like organic or something, but it's not that much difference. What you're buying in that Michelin star restaurant is the Michelin star chef, and the experience and the amazing, caring, but not too intrusive waiters, and the booking service is great, and everything. And one thing I'm really, really keen to get across is that even if you're watching this thinking, I'm not a Michelin star restaurant, I don't do all the areas of the face yet, and I'm not even particularly, sure that I'm as experienced as I need to be. Actually, think about all the other value adds you present. For example, are you really caring? Are you talking to your patients, who've just had a divorce, and giving them that gorgeous love, and being funny on your social media, or, all these kinds of things? Are you informative? Do you give great videos on your social media that help people through their journey? Those things are not commodities. Most people aren't doing them. Step up, give value, and then let people know in your marketing that you are doing this. Let people know about your values. Let people know that you don't overtreat, that you won't just go for the quickest buck. And honestly, that stuff means so, so much. And I think that's the way to decommoditize yourself and actually to not have to give the cheapest prices in town.
Yeah, you have to give more of yourself, which is what I think the reason people become commodities is that they don't actually necessarily value, they haven't realized where they fit into all this. And it took me a while to do this at the beginning as well, because I remember getting feedback from people and then realizing what I was doing differently. Because before then I thought everyone was doing the same thing. And you might have that yourself where you think there is no difference between me and the practitioner down the road. It's only when your clients come back and say, you know what, I went somewhere else and they didn't give me half the information. They didn't even do a proper consultation like you do. And you're thinking, I thought everyone was doing what I'm doing, and they're not. So you need to get that message out in your marketing, so that people can make a rational choice. And some of this comes from people not believing that the consumer actually will make a rational choice. You've got to have faith in the consumer that if they understand the value of what you're offering, they'll make a logical choice, which might be that it costs a bit more, but they're getting something important to them. So I don't know why it happens in this industry more than many others, but most of us will have a £700 phone in our pocket that is the best phone we could find, because that's really important to us. Not everyone. But if everyone had the mindset that it was only the cheapest phone that would survive, we'd all be still carrying around Nokias. that did nothing. So realizing that if you provide something of value, people will pay 10 times as much if you can provide 10 times the value, should lift your eyes to the horizon. And then you can start to innovate around what really matters to your patients instead of innovating around cutting corners, which is what happens when you go for the other end of the market.
You've got to get still and think, what is my value? And the best way to do that is to ask your customers, say, oh, why did you come to me? I'm just curious. You don't have to be weird about it. Just say, oh, I've been following a marketing person online and they said it was a good idea to ask, why did you come to me? And then from there, you can actually get clear on your value. Start talking about that in your marketing, and you no longer are a commodity. You're no longer that bag of grain or whatever it might be. So
It's a really good question. Why did you come to me? People will give you real insight into how you were perceived in the outside world, and a really great question. I definitely recommend that. You mustn't think that people are there by accident. Virtually no one is there just because they just found the first person on Instagram. Something you've done has caused them to come, or something that they perceive that you are, and that gives you really good feedback about how to build the next part of your business. And it may not always be good. It can just be, well, you're the closest. That's fine. That's still a niche you can dominate. No one else can be closer to that person. But look for the qualitative examples. So you seem really caring. I saw you wrote something that made me think, understand fillers better, so you're informing them. Whatever it is that you're doing, try and look for the ones that are around you adding value, and then do more of that. Because it's hard, it's easy for us to say, but when you experience a client who's booked in saying, I read a blog that you wrote on like halal Botox or something that we did, then you're like, oh wow, that actually helps someone make a decision. I'm going to do more of that. It'll drive you to do more.
So Tim, coronavirus, how can we as practitioners deal with all of the noise that's out there about coronavirus? Our customers might cancel their appointment. We want to make sure that we're doing everything right, kind of safety-wise and infection-wise and all the rest of it. What would be the skinny on how to approach this well?
Well, first thing is people have been asking me my opinion on coronavirus a lot. In clinic yesterday, it was every conversation that came up. And so I think you need to be prepared as a clinician. If you want to build trust with your patients, you need to know a bit about this virus. It's a huge topic. So what are you going to tell them? And then second layer, more importantly, is the public health perspective. What are you actually doing in your clinic to prevent the spread of the virus? There are a couple of things I think people have got wrong on social media. There is these memes going around of it's a load of noise generated by the media and it's not really a threat. There's a lot of stuff like that which is downplaying the potential threat. And I understand it, because one of the things that comes up in these memes is the numbers have appeared small for so long. So if there are 40 people infected in China on one day, why are we worrying about 40 people in China? We're a long way away and there's so few of them. What I think people are missing is the exponential threat. So if you picture someone with flu as being a bit like a domino, with seasonal flu, the R number is close to 1. So if one person gets the flu, they tend to pass it on to one other. From a domino perspective, one domino falls over, knocks over the next domino. Each fall of a domino is a transmission cycle. And so you could say after 15 transmission cycles, 15 people will have flu. The difference with the coronavirus is that one domino effectively knocks over 3 other dominoes if the R number is 3. It's usually about 2.5 to 3 that I've seen mentioned in the studies. That means there's a completely different result when you get to the end of 15 cycles. In fact, at the end of 15 transmission cycles with the coronavirus, it's about 4 to 5 million people who have the virus. And that puts us in a whole different world of risk. I don't think people are very good at anticipating exponential changes. It's a little bit like mobile phones when they were first adopted. We had one girl in our school that had one and everyone thought she was a bit weird. And then literally a year later, you had to have a mobile phone. And no one saw that coming. I mean, even the companies at the time didn't predict it. They were saying, an adoption of a few percent a year. That's because it's an exponential change. These changes that happen in that way, our brains are not geared up for. And in fact, if you look at an exponential graph, in small sections, it looks like a straight line. And this is what it looks like. If you look at the number of cases in the UK, it was 40, then it was 80. That doesn't seem like a big difference, but those mathematics played out over a few weeks can turn into millions. So what I realized about this exponential component, the fact that it's growing so fast, is that if you want to respond properly to the coronavirus, you actually have to overreact to react properly, because it's changing so fast that our activity now to limit spread will seem like, why are we doing it? There's only 3 cases in Manchester. In fact, there's more than 3 now, I think, already. But it's by the time it gets to the point it's an actual threat, it's too late. Like you haven't taken the steps. You've probably already passed it on. Someone in your building has passed it on. So I think we should start acting like it's already everywhere in order to prevent it getting everywhere. Some people think it's going to be too hard to do that because we don't live in a dictatorship where we can weld people into their buildings like they're doing in China. But that is what controls the R number. So if you want to decrease the number of spread, you need to limit the number of exposures to other people. And you can do that when you can barricade up roads and close people into their buildings. But we're never going to do that in the UK. We're going to probably stop certain events and maybe limit. Schools might be closed, for example. That'll make a significant difference. The goal is to get that number to less than 1, because as soon as it's less than 1, it dies out. That's very hard to do, but it's possible with good practice. So simple things in your clinic are worth doing. One of the things is it survives on surfaces for a fair amount of time, not as long as I've heard some people say, up to 7 days. I think it's probably less than that. Most people are saying a bit less, but it does survive on particularly shiny surfaces, so less well on clothing for some reason. But you should probably clean your door handles. Anything that's touched as people come and leave the clinic should be cleaned regularly. I know Ellie does that in our clinic. She's always cleaning each room, so that might really help. The other thing would be alcohol hand gels. Now, you can't use, a lot of us use chlorhexidine. Chlorhexidine doesn't actually work. So Sophie Riddell, I hope I'm saying your name right, Sophie. So Sophie, who's a clinical pharmacist who does aesthetics, shared on her page that the alcohol, that you need to use alcohol in order to kill the virus. So if you use chlorhexidine, it's actually not strong enough. So the virus is wrapped in a little plasmid layer which protects it from the environment to a degree. So you need to use alcohol with over 70% concentration. So you can't use vodka. It's got to be 70%. And that's one other thing you can do is clean your surfaces. If you think someone might have been slightly ill, maybe they've come from a country and they've already arrived in your clinic, there's that risk, then you might want to do that. Spruce everything up and clean it just in case. You could also send a message out to your clients to prevent those who may have recently been in these high-risk areas, which perhaps we can provide a link for. It's on the Department of Health website, gov.uk. You can Google the advice about which countries are high risk. You may want to advise patients who've recently been there not to attend your clinic. You won't lose out because very few of them will, but everyone else will know that you're taking precautions.
So the alcohol, is that when you get the normal alcohol gel, is that enough?
Yeah, the normal alcohol gel is enough to kill the virus if it's on your hands. There is droplet spread. So you might, if you're close to someone, it might spread it. They don't think it spreads that easily, not as easily as flu, but it's still possible if you're close to someone. If you keep a 2-meter gap, that's meant to be enough. None of us are doing that in aesthetics. You're closer than that. But alcohol wipes will clean your hands and surfaces well, effectively.
What do you think about when we have boundaries in our clinic to protect against did not attend, DNAs and people kind of potentially taking the mickey a little bit? What do you think about if they quote coronavirus and they are within let's say you've got a 24 hours window where you say if you cancel within this 24-hour window before your appointment, then you're going to lose you're going to lose your money you deposit or your booking fee. What do you think about if they suddenly quote coronavirus? Well, I've got the coronavirus, or well, I'm worried about the coronavirus. I'm worried about getting the coronavirus in your clinic. Would you forego that money?
That's really tough. I know the holiday companies are not giving way. So if you've booked a cruise, they're still saying you need to come on the cruise. As long as we're operating the cruise, you need to come on it or you lose your money. So there's something in that. Having said that, what you don't want is someone with the coronavirus turning up to your clinic. And that's not unlikely that we could get to that point. It is spreading fairly quickly. So I would probably say, you've got me there. Maybe hold on for their deposit, reschedule the next appointment. Yeah. But it's I wouldn't want to be putting any incentive for someone who's actually sick to come to the clinic.
Would you be wearing a mask in your clinic?
So one of the reasons you might do that is because you're worried about asymptomatic spread. So from what I've read, the theory is very few cases are spread by people who aren't symptomatic, but there's at least a couple of anecdotal stories where it could be. So I'd possibly be doing that if someone, there should be some reason why you're worried, which shouldn't just be that they're Chinese. That's where it gets really sensitive. You don't want to make someone feel like you're basically being racist. If they've recently come from a high risk part of China, that's different. But you probably would say, I'd rather not see you at all. I think the real defense is that you isolate the risks before they come to you in your clinic, and you just advise them to come back within 2 weeks later. So anyone who's come from a high risk area, or has a contact who's been in a high risk area, or someone who's actually had the illness, who's been near them, you should not see those people in your clinic. Once they're in front of you wearing a mask, it might help. It's only going to be a small difference. Apparently, if the masks get wet, it's worse. Interestingly, so the virus obviously dissolves into the whatever is on the mask, and then you're more likely to get it. And you need really good quality masks that have a really tight seal, which most people don't have. It's probably better at keeping the virus in if you've already got the virus than it is about keeping the virus out. So they're not that amazing. You could wear them though. It's not unreasonable to wear them in a clinical environment anyway. So I hope you found that useful, and there's something for you to go home and think about, maybe something you can improve, and maybe I've given you some insight on how things really work. It would be really great to hear your comments below, so leave us your thoughts, share this if you think it's helpful, and we will see you on the next episode.
Take care.